Now I'm going to focus on getting this axle ready to full paint and prep to be on the truck. We're going to start with getting the shock mount on. This came from Trail Gear. It's designed to fit on the rock assault axle. The only issue I've run into is that I've rotated the perch mount. So normally this would be mounted closer to here, but I actually need to roll it back a little bit. To do that, I'm using the plate at the leaf spring. And if you can see it, got it zeroed out. What I'm going to do is take my little Razzler magnet, hold it to the axle, and then use my angle finder and set it to 90 degrees. 90.1. That implies it is perpendicular to the plane at the top of this. So that's the path that the shock would move in as the suspension travels up and down. So I'm going to tack it in place right there. Alright, got this prepped for welding, tacked 2 opposite corners. Damn, it wasn't that close a second ago. So we're 90 degrees off from up there. I've got an assistant day. He says he's going to go ahead and weld this in. I'm going to sand down the other side and get it prepped. Setting up the passenger side to get it tacked in. The thing to be noted here is that the upper trunnion bearing is right in there and I don't have my seals on it yet. So to mitigate both heat and splatter, we've got a t-shirt soaked in water. We've been leaning it over it to both help tone the heat down as well as keep anything from splashing in there. Take the angle finder again, zero it out on the perch. Got a magnet holding my mount up. Get it set to 90.00. And then we're going to go ahead and tack it in. Now that we got those tacked on, we're going to go ahead and take the axle out. We can always do steering stops with the axle out of the truck. This is more crucial to the alignment of the shock, which gets mounted on the frame, so needed it under here for that. Gonna go ahead and unbolt it and get it out of the truck. Alright, over here we got some 1/4 inch 2x2 angle. I'm cutting 1-inch sections out of it. I'm going to do straps here, and I'll probably shorten these each custom to fit the axle tube. This will be where the steering stop hits, run into the edge of this. So that's kind of the plan. I think quarter wall should be pretty good. It's definitely thicker than anything stock, and can always reinforce it internally if I need to. We cut these steering stops out of some 1/4 inch. As I previously showed, we cut them off in 1-inch wide strips and cut them at an angle that we kind of liked. Made 4 of them all the same, and then the idea is going to be where the steering stop on the knuckle is. We will try to weld this to where it lands. That way when you slide it in, it makes contact. So we're probably going to push it all the way in until it bottoms out on the knuckle, as you can see, and then butt this to it. That way it's kind of equalized. Like, you can never go any farther in because it's hitting the knuckle itself and the bump stop at the same time. And if we ever need to minimize, we can always back this screw out and give ourselves some more room. Kind of like that. So we're going to do our best to just set these in place, get them tacked in, triple check all of them, and then just weld these in. I don't think this deserves that much more attention. It's pretty simple. Got the axle housing nearly painted for prepped for paint. Can't talk. Took some 220 grit, sanded spots, looked for any burrs or problems, any high spots, took them down. So we're just going to acetone it and throw some more self-etching primer on it. Once I got a good coat of primer on there, I'll switch over to doing my semi-gloss black that I've been using. Got a coat of self-etching primer on it. Ran an aluminum rod through the center so we never had to touch it. Gonna set it in the shop overnight, let that cure up real well before I ever put the final coat of, what am I running? Just a Rust-Oleum semi-gloss black. I think also I will be taking the diff out from underneath that rag and throwing it in before paint. Home from work today. The primer coat has had plenty of time to set up and dry. Looks pretty good. I picked up some cans of brake clean. I'm going to spray in towards the center on the inside. Just need to do a kind of final cleaning before I put the diff in here. So I'm going to spray in from the sides and try to wipe out any mess or garbage or residual out from the center. Get it cleaned out. I'll go ahead and put the diff in after that. Here's the front differential I'm going to put in. This is actually how it goes in the truck. It is a high pinion out of a 80 series Land Cruiser. I think it's probably 93 or 96, can't remember. It's just an open diff. There's nothing going on. It looks like it's got a little surface rust, and that's fine. It's just been sitting under the bench for a while. I've cleaned it out pretty good. Everything moves. There's no big chips in the teeth or anything crazy. Normal wear and tear for a truck that had age on it, but anyhow, I just went around it. I marked one of the teeth with some Sharpie and counted around it. I got 41 ring gear teeth and 10 pinion teeth right there, which means this is indeed a 410 differential, which I'm quite confident is what I have in the back of the Tacoma is a 410. So for now, these two can run together and won't interfere with one another. I'm still gonna have to get a drive shaft made, but that's another fight. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the diff. I've cleaned it out. Or, excuse me, the axle housing. I've cleaned it out. This is a stock gasket, just a Felpro. They work good for me. A little bit worried about it sealing well. I keep thinking about maybe adding some RTV or something, because the mating surface at the bottom of the diff is pretty thin. But, I don't know. We'll see. I probably won't. Either way. I'm going to take this gasket, throw it on the housing, and then drop this differential in there. Using a bolt for the lower one, this will act as a drain. When they shorten this differential, keep it high and tight like this, they get rid of the drain plug on it. So I've actually already sanded this in the past, where it's nice and flush with this, but there's no sharp edges or anything, and it's still nice and flat. So I'm just going to use a bolt for this one. If I ever want to drain it, pull this plug, let it run out of the bottom. Alright, for torque spec, gotta set it to 20 foot-pounds, which is actually the lowest this goes, which isn't that great for accuracy, but that's all I got. Been a few days since the last update. Didn't film all the painting, but the axle housing has been primed, painted, and clear coated. I wasn't originally intending to clear coat, but I decided to do it just for paint protection. Hopefully it lasts a little bit longer. I'm not a huge fan of the glossiness it gets, but I don't think it'll matter. It'll fade into the truck and get covered in mud and get scratched, and who cares. So it's back together. Diffs in it. Need to finish up the axle. To do so, got both of the knuckles sitting here still. You can see sort of my brake setup is getting figured out. So what's going on with this brake setup, I'll just give you the quick rundown. This is a knuckle off of like a 87 Toyota pickup V6. Twin, so it'd be 4-piston caliper. They have the same eye-to-eye measurement as the stock Tacoma. I drilled these out. Well, I didn't drill them out, I just tapped them to 1/2 inch by 20 thread pitch, so fine pitch, 1/2 inch bolts. I then drilled out the ears to 1/2 inch so that these bolts will pass all the way through with no problem. And then that allows me to put the caliper on the outside of the knuckle instead of on the inside. And the only thing it needs is a slight spacer. And I found that these little lock washers, 1/2 inch lock washers, basically perfect. You put it in between the two, tighten this down, it pushes this out just enough that when you take a Tacoma rotor and drop it over this whole brake assembly works. So that's how the brake's going to go. But anyhow, that's not the point. The point is, to finish these up, I need to slap the seal that goes on the back side of the knuckle onto the knuckle. I need to get the let's see if I can find it here. These are Marlin Crawler's heavy-duty inner axle seals. So step 1, inner axle seals. Step 2 is put the backside knuckle seal, ball seal, over the knuckle. Put the entire knuckle assembly back on it. Torque all the lower cap and the upper steering arm cap. Tighten that all down. Then assemble that seal on the back side of the knuckle. I've got bolts and hardware laying around to do it. I've got the lockout hub assembly ready to go, as well as the lockout dials. Trying to stunt a little bit, got them painted up nice. Got the upper U-bolt plates cleaned up and clear coated. Got the calipers cleaned up and clear coated, and I clear coated those in a like high temp clear caliper paint. I don't know, I just kind of liked going clear. Mostly did it because we clear coated the steering box and it looks really nice. This is a remanufactured unit by Lars, I think. Should be fine. Like I said, got it in, intended to paint it black originally, and then we just kind of had the idea of doing clear, and I think it looks pretty cool. So we did the same thing for the calipers. I think it'll be fine. I got fuzzies on it though from the tack rag, didn't do it very well. But gonna go ahead and get this axle fully assembled. I want to see this thing done, greased, ready to go into the truck, just minus having fluid in it. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish this thing up. Alright, we took the masking tape off of the ball. It looks good. Feel a little piece here on the bottom. So the first thing we're going to install is the inner axle seal. This one is from Marlin Crawler. It's like their heavy-duty inner axle seal. I have run the stock Toyota stuff, or just a standard Trail Gear branded replacement, and messed them up. They're pretty easy to mess up. But these I've been running, and they are awesome. They got 2 lip seals that keep it sealed up. So first thing we do is put it in there and tap it in. Found a socket that's really close to the diameter. And just tap it on in. Got it fully seated in there. I can't feel any lip around it, so it's in there. I'm going to take a little bit of grease and run a liberal amount of grease around on the inside of that seal. Alright, here I've got a pre-assembled chromoly axle shaft. It's got the inner and the burr field. I already pre-greased these months ago, wrapped them in saran wrap. So they are pretty much ready to go. Gonna go ahead and peel this off and then Yeah.
They're lifting.
I have a hard time knowing when I'm in frame.
Yeah. Do you want me to turn it off?
No, not really. I mean, you can if you want. I do like breaking into pieces.
She party.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, that's shiny.
They're real fancy looking. The grease that's in it is the stuff that they supplied me with. I'm going to grease this sealing lip here. This is where that inner axle seal rides on. And I'm going to take a little bit and put it on the splines on the differential engagement end. Of course, this is the long side shaft. So then you're going to slip it on in there. You kind of hold it up as it goes in. Alright, inner axle's in, just kind of free floats. I can't hold it exactly where it's supposed to be, so it kind of tends to rub against the walls. But if you kind of hold it up a little bit, rides free. I can hear it turning the diff inside. So that is the Burfield and axle shaft in there.
Action. What kind of satisfying to say?
The next parts I have are the seals for the backside of the knuckle. These are what seal up against the ball. This is the it's a kit from Trail Gear. As I've said before, a lot of the stuff I'm using is from Trail Gear, but anyhow, this is supposed to replace the factory rubber and felt combo, and this just uses this like rock ring. I think they call it a rock ring seal. It's got 4 dimples on it. You might be able to see them here. One's down here, here, there. So those 4 dimples go toward the differential, towards the inside of the axle. All the letters and numbering on this side go towards the outside.
Go down.
Alright, got this little bit of grease on there. Like I said, the lettered side goes to the outside of the axle. And I'm going to have to figure out how to get it on there. I know this is going to take some effort. The second part is the split ring that goes behind it. They're a little easier to put on there because they the split in them kind of allows you to basically walk them around a little easier.
There.
Well, try not to scratch up the ball too bad. But there you go. Get them on there. Alright, here I have the knuckle. It's got no bearings in it right now. I took the wheel bearing assembly off of the face. Should make this a heck of a lot easier to do. So you can just slip this over with the bearing in the bottom. It slips right over the top. Then you can run the lower cap up over the bearing like that. Run those lugs up. Then I'm going to take the top cap here and put it on here. I still have my 26,000 double spacers, I think. Yeah. Still got my spacers, so then I'm going to get the top arm on. Might take some wiggling it to get it to start going down. And then we're going to throw all of our cone washers and lock washers and nuts on. Alright, got them all just snugged up with the impact here. This one isn't going to take it to full torque spec. I still got to get the torque wrench out and do 80 foot-pounds, but that's essentially the knuckle on there for steering. Feels good. Feels just like it did before. Alright, went ahead and put some grease on this brass bushing that's on the end here. The next thing that'll go on is that paper gasket I mentioned before. It's got 3 square sides on it, and so the round part goes to the top like that. So set that over. And then same for this. The bottom of those 3 flats goes down. Should seat in there pretty good like that. This is where I'm going to take the bolts for it and get them started. Alright, I've got the torque wrench out. These bolts that go to the spindle are supposed to be torqued to 38 foot-pounds. So, got then we'll go ahead and go around it and get them all torqued up. Alright, got all these torqued on here. I'm going to jump up to 80 foot-pounds and tighten up the top of the control arm bolts, or the steering arm bolts. Alright, just torqued all the upper, lower bearing, trunnion bearing caps to 80 foot-pounds. I can definitely feel the preloads tighter. It feels good. The next thing I'll be looking at here is getting the bolts on the back side for this seal in there. I also have these rock rings. They have a little like lip on this side. I'm going to face that lip towards the outside of the knuckle, towards the inside, towards the diff. The first thing you do is you take that split ring, set it up inside this lip, inside the knuckle. Got this ring pressed into that lip, and the seam here is at the very top, and it's not overlapping there. It's nice and flush across itself. And this rock ring here, get pushed up against it, or the seal I should call it, and then this is one of those rock rings that I was talking about. With this pushed up against it right there, and I'm just going to orient the little dimples towards the top and to the sides. We're going to put this little rock ring on next, line it up like that, and they come with all of the bolts. A little bolt M6 by 1, I think it's by about 15. It comes with a flat washer and lock washer. I don't know how necessary the lock and flat washer is, but I'm going to run it. And I'm going to just get all of those started, go around with the 10mm and snug them all up. Alright, we're going to call that it on the seal. Everything still moves nicely. And you can see that the seal, I don't know if you can see it in the video, as it gets up in there it starts flexing around the shaft. I've got the center right down here. It starts to conform to it, so looks pretty good. Definitely maxes out sooner than I thought it would on steering, so I may end up having to get some longer bolts right here, because you don't want to be tearing up the seal right there. Anyhow, deal with that later. On the front side of these knuckles, there's this hole here, and they have this little plug. I don't know if it's National Pipe thread, National Pipe taper plug or not, but it does seem to fit a half-inch well enough. Do need to pump some grease in here, which kind of helps fill up the knuckle ball a little bit. Not full, but you'd pump some in there. But for now, I'm just going to put the cap on there to keep dust and debris out of there. Alright, I got all the studs installed in the end of the hub assembly. I put a little bit of blue thread locker on them, kind of medium strength. Next is the hub assembly, the outer lockout hub, but not the dial. I've got the gasket here. It's round, so it goes on any hole, doesn't matter, it will fit. Okay, it's on there, and then there's two are the detents for this dowel pin, so that's where those line up. So you have to rotate the center, axle shaft will get on there, and then we're going to install the factory Toyota cone washers. I cleaned them up in the parts bin. They're in pretty good shape. So slip those on first, taper inward. Then I got the washers, followed by the nuts. And these are all M8 by 1 1/4 stuff. Honestly, this is one of the weaker portions of the Toyota axle. It's not unheard of to have people shear all 6 of these bolts off at this hub. If that happens, you will lose four-wheel drive, because this axle shaft gets locked into this assembly and then transfers power from this hub into this, well, I guess you'd say this lockout hub into the wheel bearing hub. It takes the power from that axle shaft, basically brings it out, transfers it into this splinage in here, and then transfers the power through to this part here. So anyhow, that's, I'm not going to call it a weak part of the axle, but it's, well, I guess it is weak. It's not the strongest thing. They do make, billet assemblies, and you can, I've seen some guys drill these up to 7/16 and stuff like that, but I'm going to run it for now. Alright, I got my impact driver, just going to run these in, and kind of in a star pattern. Now I'm going to tighten these up by hand. Alright, I just finished tightening all 6 of these lockout hub bolts, or nuts. So everything rotates good, looks nice. The next thing we need to do actually is pull the axle shaft out a little bit. A snap ring goes into a groove right on the inside of it. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. So you can, this is threaded on the end, you can actually thread it, I think it's another M8 by 1 1/4. Thread a bolts in there and you can pull that out, and then a snap ring is going to go over the end. Got a bolt, thread it in, and a little bit of force, you see that axle slide in and out just a little bit. That's all it needs to do. And next I got the Burfield snap ring and my snap ring pliers, and I threw it on the ground and just set this over it. Does not matter orientation, it's round, it's going to spin. Once it's on there, it should still move freely. You can fully rotate it around, and that's in place now. Alright, the next part to go on needs to be the outer lockout ring. It should be in free position whenever you take it off the truck. If you turn it to lock, this it's a cam, and it'll let this this like engagement ring, it'll stick it out. And what the idea is that when it's in there and you turn it to lock, it's springing that out and it's engaging the splines on the axle that the axle is touching. There's an assembly in there. It engages those splines to the outside of this hub, and that's how it connects that axle shaft to the outer part of this. But I've got the gasket for it. This gasket will line up with all the little cutouts. Like that. Looks nice. But I'm going to lather this guy up and lather up in there with a bunch of grease before I slide this in. Alright, got it filled up with grease. The orientation on this does matter. There are 2 little clips. If I can get it to focus. It's this little tab that rolls up right there. And it doesn't do it on the next 2, and then it does it on the one that was 180. The ones with the clips go into the teeth here that are missing a peak. This one has a peak, no peak on this one, no peak on this one. So those little clips will line up with those 2. So it'll be like that. And it should settle on down and feel like it seats flush. We got 6 brand new bolts. These are M6 by 1 pitch by 20 millimeters long. They should fit, give me a ton of thread engagement, look really nice, silver on red on black. Maybe down the road I'll replace these with nicer fresh bolts, but for now they will work. That is actually it on the passenger side knuckle assembly on the built axle. Lockout dial, lockout hub, wheel bearing hub, back seal, spindle, knuckle assembly, wiper seal on the back, upper and lower caps. Turns fine left and right, no problems. Rotates fine in the free mode. Alright, as I was trying to show earlier, and it kind of messed up on me. Got all 6 bolts in. I can turn it from free over to lock, and I can hear the diff moving. If I turn it back to free, I'm not in front of it, kind of hard. And then you turn it a little bit, you can feel that there's no engagement to that axle shaft anymore. It's just moving internally. So, fits and looks good. Alright, I know this is going to end up being kind of a longer video, but trying to do a lot on this axle and just get it done in one shot. So here's what I was talking about with the brake setup. These original ears are actually tapped to, I think, M12 by 1 1/4 or 1/5, something like that. And the calipers, the original calipers, would bolt to the back side because the solid axle hub would actually be inset about 1.5 inches, and then the rotor bolted to the back of it. In this setup, the hub is 1.5 inches farther out, and then the Tacoma rotor will slip over that. Just like that. And the idea is that I took this caliper and I tapped out the ears to 1/2 inch by 20. I have some 2-inch bolts. This should fit over this on the outside. I take these split washers, I'm going to hover them down in there like so, and get this to start threading into my caliper. Kind of tough to get started. I actually have not done this yet. This is actually my first test. Alright, as I got the bolts tight, this lock washer in between cinches down, and to me that creates that extra pressure against it that I would hope would keep this from backing out. Just like using a lock washer underneath the head. I don't see what the difference is. This is no different than a big flat washer or something at the moment. But the test here was supposed to be if the spacing of that was going to push the caliper out enough that it didn't hit the rotor. And I'm going to say no, as I have nearly no clearance here and excessive clearance on this side. So I may dig through my piles. Sorry about the light. I may dig through my pile and see if I can find a thicker 1/2 inch washer. That would push the caliper out ever so slightly. And you can see my gap down through the bottom. It's good. I got clearance. The rotor's on there, square. It's just rubbing. Sorry, my lighting, this is hard to hold, hard to get the light right where we can see something. Point is, that washer in there is how I'm going to work on my spacing to get this caliper where it needs to be on top of this rotor. But as it stands, it actually does turn, and it's very close, so I know that this is going to work fine. I ran a setup similar to this in another truck. The only difference was, instead of threading this portion of the caliper, I actually drilled it out 1/2 inch, drilled this out 1/2 inch, and just did a 1/2 inch bolt and a nut on this side. But honestly, I found that every time I had to take the caliper off, holding that nut in there kind of was a pain in the butt. If something happens if I strip this out, I can always either re-tap the caliper and put a helicoil in it, or just drill it all the way out 1/2 inch and just put a nut on this side like I did the other one. Then you know it's not coming apart. It was just a matter of like convenience. I wanted it to be like factory stuff where you just run a nut in from or a bolt in from the back. So anyhow, this side is essentially done. That's how it's going to look. Now I've completely got to do the driver's side. I'm not going to film that portion. I'm just going to burn through it real quick and hopefully show you guys the finished product here right at the very end. Alright, I've finished up the driver's side of the axle. Got all the bolts torqued, everything tight. Got the lockout on. Everything went together without a hitch. I threw the tie rod on just for the sake of showmanship. I don't have the brakes on this side. Like I said, I'm going to work out the spacing issue, but that's for another day. I'm sure this video is long. That's alright. Sometimes it takes extra time to get the information you want out. Either way, that's going to complete the actual axle build. I'm very pleased with that. And I didn't mention this. This is it's like a nipple fitting and then just like an expansion chamber for gases inside as it gets warm and expands inside. That way you don't have to run a hose up top. Looks a little doofy. I might eventually run a hose, but for now, temporary. It will work for now. But that's the axle. Need to get underneath that truck.